So we are on the topic that's called ecological interactions. Last time we met, we did part one. Today we're going to do part two, which is slides 43, excuse me, 43 to 52. So please get ready to write down some notes. Excuse me. So every organism in an ecosystem survives by obtaining the needs that we talked about last time from their environment. So sometimes there's more than one organism that's trying to compete for these needs, and that leads to competition. And sometimes there are predator prey relationships, and sometimes there's relationships where both organisms, two different organisms, will benefit because they live together and they help each other. So we are going to cover that information over the next two lectures. Today, we're going to mainly focus on competition. Okay, so in this picture here is an example of this mutually beneficial relationship, which we'll talk about more next lecture. But this is a clownfish and it's living inside a sea anemone. And basically, they are both benefiting from each other. So the clownfish is receiving shelter from the anemone, and the anemone receives nutrition as the clownfish expels waste. Its waste products go towards the sea anemone. The sea anemone lives off of those waste products, so they both are mutually benefiting. Okay, so some background. So as organisms try to survive in an ecosystem, their needs sometimes overlap with other organisms. Think back to the beaver that we talked about in the last lecture. The beaver eats plant life, but there's other rodents that live in that same area that also eat plant life. So if there's more than one beaver or more than one rodent and beaver that are living off of that available plant life, what do you think is going to happen? Think about that first slide that I just talked about. You don't actually have to write this down, but just think about it in your head. And if you think competition, that's the correct answer. Organisms in an ecosystem often have needs that overlap with one another. So perhaps they eat the same food or they use the same type of shelter. When there are more organisms than there are resources, this leads to competition, and organisms must compete or fight for resources in order to survive. So in this picture here, you're going to see there's a zebra and there's three different organisms, some sort of bird of prey, a lion, and some hyenas. All three of them are trying to compete for that zebra as food. But not only animals compete, plants also compete too, which might be weird to think about, but they do. So in this picture, you can kind of see it illustrates this. What do you see is happening with these two different species of trees? Okay. Both these trees are trying to compete for sunlight and the place to grow their roots. So this tree here has started to try to grow around this other tree in order to get the sunlight. So we often just think about animals when we talk about competition, but plants also compete for resources as well. Plants may also compete for water or minerals in the soil. And some plants actually try to attract the attention of animals for pollination. And so that also is a type of competition as well. Okay, now we're going to talk about two terms, intraspecific and interspecific. These are very similar words, so I'm going to give you a hint to try to remember them. You might want to write the hint down. Okay, so inter means between. Inter means between. Intra means among. And the hint that I use to help to remember this is I think of intramurals. When you play intramural sports, those are sports when you play with other kids in your school. So just against other kids in your school. Intramurals means like, Mr. Klein's class is playing against Miss Root's class, or just a combination of the kids in the school that, the red team and the blue team. So intra means among, so they are the same species. Inter means between, so these are two different species. So intermural sports would be sports where your school's team Volts plays against Bell Oaks. So that's interspecific, two different schools. All right, so let's bring that back to science. All right, interspecific competition is competition between different species. Interspecific competition is against competition between members of different species. So, two different species of tree, or the lion competing against the hyena. That's interspecific. They're both competing for resources. Intraspecific is when the competition occurs between members of the same species. So in this situation, and you might want to write this down as an example for intraspecific, is two male polar bears fighting over a female. Okay, so they are the same species. Intra, same species. Inter, different species. Please write those hints down. Inter, different species. Intra, same species. Okay, this case study is actually a video that we're not going to watch now. I'll play that a different day, so don't worry about that right now. All right, let's go over these questions. You may write these down and go back to them later in case you see them on an exit slip or a quiz. True or false? Competition occurs when organisms fight over resources to survive. And the answer is true. 10. The deer and squirrels both eat acorns. This behavior can lead to what type of competition? So they're different species eating the same thing. Different species. Is that interspecific or intraspecific? Different species. And the answer is interspecific, different species. So write down for 11, interspecific. 12. A male deer often locks antlers. Male deer often lock antlers when they compete over territory. So two male deer competing, same species. Which one would you pick? The answer is intraspecific, B. Okay, we're going to stop there. Please check Google Classroom for your next assignment.